The screams of metal against metal pierced through the howling wind as the iron beast lurched to a violent stop, throwing Grace Carter forward in her seat hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. Outside the frost-covered window, nothing existed but white. The blizzard had swallowed the world whole, and now the westbound train sat motionless somewhere in the Wyoming Territory, caught in nature's merciless grip like a fly in a spider's web. Grace pressed her gloved hand against the cold glass, trying to see anything beyond the wall of snow. It was December 1885, and she had been traveling from Cheyenne to Green River for 3 days now, carrying nothing but a worn carpet bag and a heart heavy with purpose. Her father lay dying in Green River, and she had promised she would reach him before the end. That promise now seemed as fragile as the icicles forming along the train car's exterior. The door at the front of the passenger car burst open, admitting a violent gust of wind and snow along with a tall figure bundled in a heavy coat. Grace watched as the man moved through the car, his boots leaving wet prints on the wooden floor. He stopped at each row of seats, bending to speak with the passengers, though Grace could not hear his words over the storm's rage. When he reached her row, she finally got a clear look at his face. Despite the frost clinging to his dark beard and the weariness in his eyes, he could not have been much older than 30. His features were strong and weathered from years of outdoor work, and when his eyes met hers, she saw genuine concern there. "Madam, I am Kieran Grayson, conductor of this train," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I need you to gather your belongings and move to the engine car. The boiler is still hot there, and we will need to conserve what heat we have." "What has happened?" Grace asked, though she already knew the answer could not be good. "Track is buried under 6 feet of snow about 50 yards ahead. We hit a drift that derailed the front car. The engineer is injured, and we are stuck here until this storm passes." Kieran's jaw tightened. Could be hours. Could be days. Grace looked around the passenger car and realized with a start that it was nearly empty. "Where are the other passengers?" "You are looking at the sum total of our travelers today," Kieran said grimly. "Most folks had sense enough not to travel in December." The 4 men who were aboard already moved to the engine car. "You are the last." She stood quickly, reaching for her bag, but Kieran was faster. He took it from the overhead rack with practiced ease. "Follow close behind me. The wind will try to knock you off your feet." The journey between cars was terrifying. The moment they stepped onto the platform, the wind hit Grace like a physical force, stealing her breath and threatening to tear her from the metal walkway. Kieran's hand closed around her upper arm, steadying her, and together they pushed through to the next car. The engine car was cramped and smelled of coal smoke and oil, but it was blessedly warm. 4 men huddled near the firebox, their faces illuminated by the orange glow. On a makeshift bed of coats lay a 5th man, his face pale and twisted in pain. Blood seeped through a bandage wrapped around his head. "This is Thomas Reed, our engineer," Kieran said, setting Grace's bag down carefully. "Took a nasty blow to the head when we hit the drift." "The other men are passengers. This is Samuel Morgan, Dutch Henderson, William Pike, and young Robert Foster." The men nodded at her, their expressions ranging from worried to outright afraid. Grace recognized the look. She had seen it before on the faces of soldiers during the war, men who knew they might not survive to see another sunrise. "How long before someone comes looking for us?" asked Dutch, a portly man with a thick mustache. Kieran fed another piece of coal into the firebox before answering. "We were due in Green River tomorrow evening. When we do not arrive, they will send a crew out, but not in this weather. Nobody can travel in this. We wait out the storm, keep the fire going, and ration what food and water we have." "How much food is that?" William Pike asked. He was older than the others, perhaps 60, with gray hair and intelligent eyes. Not much, Kieran admitted. There is a supply box in the baggage car with some hardtack and dried meat, maybe enough for 3 days if we are careful. Grace's stomach tightened. 3 days. Her father might not have 3 days. As if reading her thoughts, Kieran looked at her. "Were you heading to Green River for something important, my father?" she said quietly. "He is very ill. I received word that I should come quickly." The sympathy in Kieran's eyes was genuine. "I am sorry. We will get there as fast as we can once this storm breaks." The first night was the worst. Despite the heat from the firebox, the cold crept in through every crack and seam in the engine car. The wind howled like a living thing, and the entire train shook with each powerful gust. Grace sat with her back against the wall, her coat wrapped tightly around her, watching as Kieran moved through the car, checking on each person. He redressed Thomas's wound with careful hands, speaking to the semi-conscious engineer in low, reassuring tones. He shared out small portions of hardtack and water. He made sure the other men stayed away from the firebox when they got too cold, explaining that going from extreme cold to extreme heat too quickly could be dangerous. "You have done this before," Grace observed when he finally sat down near her. "Done what?" "Taken care of people in an emergency." Kieran was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "I was a soldier once. Fought in some of the last campaigns against the Apache in Arizona Territory back in '79. Saw men die from cold, from heat, from wounds and sickness. You learn to do what needs doing." "Why did you become a train conductor?" He smiled slightly. "Seemed peaceful enough. Ride the rails, see the country, meet different folks. Turns out Mother Nature has her own battles to wage. Do you have family waiting for you somewhere?" Grace did not know why she asked. Perhaps because the intimacy of their situation, trapped together in this metal box while death lurked outside, made normal social conventions seem trivial. "No family," Kieran said. "My parents passed when I was young. Grew up in an orphanage in Kansas City." "What about you?" "Just my father now. My mother died giving birth to my younger brother, and he only lived 3 days after her. That was 15 years ago. I have been taking care of my father since then." 15 years, Kieran repeated. "You must have been quite young." 12 years old, Grace confirmed. "Old enough to learn to cook and clean and manage a household." "That is a heavy burden for a child," Grace shrugged. "We do what we must. You said that yourself." The second day brought no relief from the storm. If anything, the blizzard seemed to intensify. The windows were completely covered in snow and ice, making the engine car feel like a tomb. Thomas Reed's condition worsened. He developed a fever, and his breathing became labored. Kieran used precious water to cool the engineer's forehead and tried to get him to drink, but Thomas was barely conscious. Grace found herself helping, using strips torn from her petticoat to make fresh bandages. "You do not have to do this," Kieran told her as she wrung out a cloth in cold water. "I want to help," Grace replied. "Sitting idle while someone suffers has never been in my nature." They worked together through the afternoon, taking turns monitoring Thomas while the other passengers huddled together, conserving energy. William Pike led them in prayer. Young Robert Foster, who could not have been more than 19, talked nervously about his sweetheart waiting for him in Green River. "Her name is Mary Alice," Robert said, his voice cracking slightly. "We are getting married in the spring. I went to Cheyenne to earn enough money working at the stockyards to buy her a proper ring. I am sure she will be glad to see you, ring or no ring," Grace said gently. "Did you leave someone behind?" Robert asked. "A husband maybe," Grace shook her head. "No husband. I have spent my years caring for my father. There was never time for courting or marriage." She felt Kieran's eyes on her but did not look his way. That night, as the others slept fitfully, Kieran and Grace sat near the firebox keeping watch over Thomas. The engineer's breathing had become even more troubled, a rattling sound that made Grace's heart ache. "He is not going to make it, is he?" she whispered. Kieran's jaw clenched. "I do not know. Head wounds are unpredictable. I have seen men with worse injuries recover and men with minor wounds die. We just have to do our best for him. You care about him. Thomas has been running this route for 5 years. We have worked together all that time. He is a good man with a wife and 2 little girls waiting for him in Laramie." Kieran's voice was rough with emotion. "He was showing me a photograph of them just before we hit the drift. The oldest girl just turned 6. Grace reached out without thinking and placed her hand over Kieran's. His hand was warm despite the cold around them, calloused from hard work but gentle when he turned it over to grip hers. "We are doing everything we can," she said softly. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, watching the rise and fall of Thomas's chest. It felt natural somehow, this connection between them. As if the dire circumstances had stripped away all pretense and formality, leaving only raw human need for comfort and understanding. "Tell me about your father," Kieran said eventually. "What is he like?" Grace smiled, though her eyes grew distant. "He is stubborn and proud and has the worst temper of anyone I have ever known. He also has the kindest heart. After my mother died, he could have sent me to live with relatives. My aunt in Philadelphia offered to take me. But he kept me with him, learned to braid my hair even though his fingers were too big and clumsy for it. He read to me every night, even after working 12-hour days at the lumber mill. He sounds like a good father." "He is the best father," Grace said, her voice thick. "Which is why I have to reach him. I have to tell him goodbye properly, let him know how much he meant to me." "You will," Kieran said with conviction. "This storm cannot last forever." But the storm did not seem to know that. The 3rd day dawned with no change in the weather. The wind continued to shriek, and the snow continued to fall. Worse, their supplies were running desperately low. Kieran rationed out the last of the dried meat and hardtack, giving Grace a slightly larger portion than he took for himself. "You need to eat too," she protested. "I am bigger." "I can go longer without food," he replied firmly. Thomas Reed died that afternoon. His breathing simply stopped, the rattle in his chest falling silent as his body finally gave up its fight. Kieran closed the engineer's eyes gently and said a prayer over him. The other men helped wrap the body in a blanket and moved it to the far end of the car, where the cold would preserve it for burial later. Grace watched Kieran's face as he worked, saw the grief there carefully controlled but present nonetheless. When the grim task was finished, he sat down heavily and put his head in his hands. She moved to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I am sorry." "I should have stopped the train sooner," Kieran said, his voice barely audible. "I saw the weather turning, knew we were running into trouble, but I kept going. I thought we could make it through to the next station. You could not have known the track would be buried. You could not have known we would derail. I should have been more careful. Thomas is dead because of my decision." Grace turned to face him fully, taking his face in her hands and forcing him to look at her. "Thomas is dead because we are caught in a blizzard, not because of you. You have kept the rest of us alive. You have given us warmth and hope and leadership. Do not dishonor his memory by blaming yourself for something beyond your control." Kieran's eyes searched hers, and Grace felt something shift between them. The air seemed to crackle with an energy that had nothing to do with the storm outside. She was suddenly acutely aware of how close they were, of the warmth of his skin under her palms, of the way he was looking at her like she was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. "Grace," he whispered, and hearing her name on his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. But before either of them could move or speak again, Dutch Henderson called out, "The wind is dying down." They broke apart quickly, both turning toward the window. Dutch was right. The constant howling had diminished to a mere moan. Through a small gap where the ice had melted from the heat, Grace could see that the snow was no longer falling horizontally. "The storm is breaking," William Pike said, moving to the window. "Praise God, the storm is breaking." Kieran was on his feet immediately, all business again. "We are not out of danger yet. We still have to dig out the track and get the train moving again, and we are nearly out of food and water." "How far are we from Green River?" Samuel Morgan asked. Kieran considered. "Based on where we were when we stopped, I would say about 15 miles. Too far to walk in these conditions, especially with the snow this deep." "What about sending someone ahead on snowshoes?" Robert suggested. "If someone could reach the town, they could send help back." "That someone would have to navigate 15 miles through snow that is probably 5 or 6 feet deep in most places, with no clear landmarks because everything is buried," Kieran said. "And temperatures that could freeze a man solid if he stopped moving for too long. It would be suicide." "It might be our only choice," William said quietly. "We have no food left. If the train cannot move, we will starve here waiting for rescue." The men fell silent, the weight of their situation settling over them like a blanket. Grace felt her heart pounding. Somewhere ahead, 15 miles away, her father was dying. Every hour that passed was an hour she might never get back. "I will go," Kieran said finally. "No," Grace protested immediately. "You said yourself it would be suicide." "I said it would be difficult and dangerous." "I did not say impossible." Kieran was already moving, checking supplies. "I was a cavalry scout for 2 years. I know how to navigate in difficult terrain, and I am probably the strongest man here, no offense to the rest of you." "Even so, you should not go alone," Dutch said. "Take someone with you." Kieran shook his head. "2 men move slower than one, eat more food, need more water. If I go alone and travel light, I can move fast. I can reach Green River by tomorrow morning if I push through the night." "You will freeze to death," Grace said, her voice sharp with fear. He looked at her and his expression softened. "I will not freeze, I promise you that. And when I get to Green River, I will make sure they know about your father. I will make sure you get to see him." Tears burned in Grace's eyes. "I do not want you to die trying to save me." "I am not going to die." Kieran moved close to her, taking both her hands in his. "I am going to walk to Green River, send back help, and then I am going to make sure you get to your father. Trust me." "I do trust you," Grace whispered. "That is what terrifies me." Something flickered in Kieran's eyes, something deep and intense that made Grace's breath catch. But there was no time to explore it. He squeezed her hands once more, then turned to begin preparations. The other men helped gather what supplies they could spare. A canteen of water, though it was nearly empty. Matches wrapped in oilcloth to keep them dry. Extra layers of clothing. William Pike produced a small flask of whiskey from his coat pocket. "For emergencies," he said, handing it to Kieran. "The burn will help if you feel yourself starting to freeze." As Kieran dressed for the journey, layering clothes until he looked twice his normal size, Grace stood by the window watching the last of the daylight fade. The storm had definitely passed, but night was coming, and with it even colder temperatures. When Kieran was ready, he paused by the door. "Keep the fire going, but do not waste coal. Ration what water is left. If I am not back within 2 days, it means I did not make it, and you should try something else." "You will make it," Grace said firmly. She moved to him and, before she could think better of it, rose on her toes and kissed his cheek. "Be safe, Kieran Grayson." His hand came up to touch the place where her lips had been. "I will. I swear it." Then he was gone, disappearing into the white landscape beyond the train. Grace pressed her face to the cold glass, watching his dark figure grow smaller and smaller until it vanished completely into the gathering darkness. The hours that followed were the longest of Grace's life. She sat by the window, straining for any sign of movement in the darkness, though she knew it was futile. The other men tried to sleep, but she could tell from their restless movements that they were as worried as she was. What had she done, letting him go out there alone? What if he was already dead, frozen in some snowbank? The thought made her physically ill. "He will be all right," William said softly. He had moved to sit beside her. "That is a capable man. He knows what he is doing." "How can you be sure?" "Because I have lived 62 years on this earth, and I have learned to read people. Kieran Grayson is a survivor. More than that, he has something to come back to." William's eyes were knowing. "He has you." Grace felt her cheeks flush. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes the heart knows what the mind has not yet figured out." William patted her hand. "I saw the way you two looked at each other. That is not something you find every day. It would be a shame to waste it because of fear." Grace had no answer to that. She turned back to the window, her heart aching with worry and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. The night passed with agonizing slowness. Grace dozed fitfully, her dreams filled with images of Kieran struggling through the snow, falling, freezing. She would jerk awake with her heart pounding, only to remember that he was really out there, that her nightmares might be reality. Morning came gray and cold. The men woke stiff and hungry, their faces gaunt. They had no food left and the water was gone. Dutch tried to melt snow for drinking, but it took so much snow to make even a small amount of water that the process was painfully slow. Grace's throat was parched, and her stomach cramped with hunger, but those discomforts paled next to her worry for Kieran. Had he made it to Green River? Was he even alive? The sun climbed higher, though it gave little warmth. Robert Foster began to talk about walking out, about trying to follow Kieran's trail. Samuel Morgan argued against it, saying they should wait. The discussion grew heated, voices rising in the cramped space. "Enough," Grace said sharply, surprising herself as much as the men. "We wait," Kieran said. 2 days. It has not even been one full day yet. We wait." The men subsided, chastened. William gave her an approving nod. The afternoon dragged on. Grace found herself praying, something she had not done much since her mother died. "Please," she thought, "please let him be safe. Please let him make it. I will do anything. Just please let him come back." It was nearly sunset when Robert, who was watching at the window, suddenly shouted, "Someone is coming. I see people coming." Everyone rushed to the windows. Grace pressed her face to the glass, her heart hammering. Through the glare of the setting sun on the snow, she could see movement. Multiple figures, some on horseback, some on foot, all moving toward the stranded train. And at the front, walking with a determined stride despite obvious exhaustion, was Kieran. Grace did not remember moving. One moment she was at the window, and the next she was throwing open the door and jumping down into the snow. It came up to her thighs, making movement difficult, but she fought through it, calling his name. "Kieran," he looked up, and even from a distance she could see his face transform. He began moving faster, pushing through the deep snow toward her. When they finally reached each other, Grace threw herself into his arms with such force that they both nearly fell. "You are alive," she gasped, feeling tears freeze on her cheeks. "You made it. You are alive." Kieran's arms came around her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I promised you I would come back. I keep my promises." She pulled back just enough to look at his face. His beard was crusted with ice, his lips were cracked and bleeding, and his face was raw from windburn. He looked half dead from exhaustion. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. You walked 15 miles through a blizzard, she said, her voice shaking. I had something to come back to, he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. The rescue party from Green River reached them then, men with shovels and supplies and a doctor to check on the survivors. They brought food and water and blankets. They began the work of clearing the track and preparing to move the train. But Grace barely noticed any of it. She held onto Kieran's hand as they walked back to the train, refusing to let go. He was swaying with exhaustion, but he would not sit down until he had spoken to the lead rescuer, a grizzled man named Jack Porter who served as Green River's sheriff. There is a woman on this train, Grace Carter, Kieran said, his voice hoarse. Her father is dying in Green River. She needs to get to him as quickly as possible. Can you take her on horseback? Sheriff Porter looked at Grace, then back at Kieran. We can do that. Though I have to tell you, son, you should not be going anywhere but to a warm bed. You are about done in. I am going with her, Kieran said firmly. Kieran, no, Grace protested. You need to rest. You nearly died getting help. I am going with you, he repeated, and there was steel in his voice. I told you I would make sure you got to your father, I meant it. Grace wanted to argue, but she saw the determination in his eyes and knew it would be useless. You are the stubbornest man I have ever known. Second stubbornest, Kieran corrected with a faint smile. You said your father has the worst temper of anyone you have ever known. I imagine stubbornness goes with that. Despite everything, Grace found herself laughing. The ride to Green River was a blur. Sheriff Porter provided 2 horses, and Kieran rode behind Grace, his arms around her waist, keeping her steady. She could feel the tremors running through him, the way he struggled to stay upright. Twice he nearly fell, and she had to grab his arms to keep him in the saddle. Stay with me, she kept saying. Just a little farther. Stay with me, Kieran. They reached Green River as full dark settled over the town. Sheriff Porter led them straight to a small house on the east side of town where Grace's father lived. A neighbor woman answered the door, her face drawn with worry. Grace, thank the Lord. Your father has been asking for you. The doctor says it could be any time now. Grace slid off the horse and turned to help Kieran down. He nearly collapsed, but she caught him, propping him up against her side. You need to see a doctor, she said. I will. After you see your father. Kieran's words were slurred with exhaustion. Go, I will wait here. Grace looked at the neighbor woman. Please, can you help him inside? Get him warm and give him something to eat and drink, of course, dear. Go to your father. Grace ran into the house. Her father's bedroom was at the back, and she could hear his labored breathing before she even opened the door. When she stepped inside, her heart clenched. He had always been such a big man, strong and vital, but the figure in the bed looked shrunken and frail. Papa, she whispered, moving to his side, his eyes fluttered open. For a moment they were clouded with confusion, but then recognition sparked and a weak smile crossed his face. Grace, my girl, you came. Of course I came. She took his hand, feeling how cold and thin it was. I will always come when you need me. I am sorry, he rasped. Sorry to pull you all this way, sorry to leave you. Do not talk like that, save your strength. But her father shook his head slightly. We both know what is happening, girl. I am dying, have been dying for months now. The consumption has eaten me up from the inside. Grace felt tears spill down her cheeks. I am not ready to lose you, I know. I was not ready to lose your mother either, but life does not ask our permission for these things. He coughed, a wet sound that made Grace wince. But I need to tell you something before I go. You have spent your whole life taking care of me. You gave up everything, your youth, your chances at love and marriage, all to be my nurse. I did not give up anything. I chose to stay with you because I love you, and I love you for it. But Grace, when I am gone, I need you to promise me something. Promise me you will live your own life, find someone to love, have children. Be happy. Do not spend the rest of your years alone because you think it is what you owe me. Papa, promise me." His grip on her hand tightened with surprising strength. "Promise me you will find love." Grace thought of Kieran, waiting outside, half dead from exhaustion because he had refused to break his promise to get her here. She thought of the way her heart had stopped when he disappeared into the blizzard, the way it had soared when she saw him alive. "I promise," she whispered. Her father smiled. "Good girl. Now I am very tired. I think I will sleep for a while." Grace stayed by his side, holding his hand as his breathing gradually slowed. The doctor came in at some point, checked his patient, and shook his head sadly. The neighbor woman brought Grace water and tried to get her to eat, but she could not swallow past the lump in her throat. As dawn light began to creep through the window, her father took one last rattling breath and was still. Grace sat there for a long time, still holding his hand, letting the tears come freely now. She cried for the loss of the man who had raised her, who had loved her unconditionally, who had given her everything he had. She cried for the years of struggle and sacrifice, for the life he had lived with such determination despite losing so much. But she also cried with gratitude. Gratitude that she had made it in time, that she had been able to say goodbye, that his last thoughts had been of her happiness. Eventually, the doctor gently guided her from the room. The neighbor woman, whose name was Martha Davies, wrapped her in a warm shawl and led her to the kitchen. There, slumped in a chair by the fire, was Kieran. He had clearly tried to stay awake, but exhaustion had claimed him. His head was bowed, his breathing deep and even. Someone had given him food and water, and he had been covered with a thick blanket. "He refused to leave," Martha said softly. "Said he needed to be here when you came out. Fell asleep about an hour ago." Grace moved to stand beside him, looking down at his sleeping face. Even in sleep, there were lines of worry around his eyes. His hands, resting on his knees, were blistered and raw from the brutal journey he had made. "He walked 15 miles through a blizzard to save us," Grace said quietly. "Then rode straight here without resting to make sure I could see my father. I do not even know why. We are practically strangers." Martha smiled knowingly. "I do not think you are strangers at all, dear. That young man has been sitting in this kitchen asking about you since the moment he arrived. Wanted to know if I knew you, what you were like, if you were happy here. He cares about you very much. We have only known each other for 3 days. Sometimes 3 days is all it takes. My Harold proposed after knowing me for 2 days. We had 43 wonderful years together before he passed." Martha patted Grace's shoulder. "You have just lost your father. You need time to grieve. But when you are ready, I think you should talk to that young man. Really talk to him." Grace nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She reached out and gently touched Kieran's shoulder. "Kieran, wake up." He jerked awake instantly, his hand going to his hip as if reaching for a weapon that was not there. Old cavalry instincts, Grace thought. But then his eyes focused on her, and all the tension left his body. "Grace, your father, he passed an hour ago." Her voice cracked on the words. Kieran stood immediately and pulled her into his arms. Grace let herself collapse against him, let him hold her while she cried. He did not say anything, did not try to offer empty platitudes. He just held her, one hand stroking her hair, letting her grieve. When the tears finally subsided, Grace pulled back slightly. "You should be in bed. You are about to collapse." "I am all right." "You are a terrible liar." Grace managed a watery smile. "Martha, is there somewhere this stubborn man can sleep before he falls over? The spare room is made up. Come on, young man. You need rest, and I will not take no for an answer." Kieran looked like he wanted to argue, but another wave of exhaustion seemed to hit him. He swayed on his feet, and Grace had to steady him. "Go," she said gently. "Sleep. I will still be here when you wake up." He searched her face. "Promise?" I promise." Martha led him away, and Grace heard the sound of a door closing. She sank into the chair Kieran had vacated, staring into the fire. Her father was gone. The man she had built her entire life around was gone. She should feel empty, lost, and part of her did. But another part felt something else, freedom perhaps. The freedom to finally think about what she wanted, who she wanted to be. The freedom to consider a future that was not defined by duty and obligation. The freedom to fall in love. The next few days passed in a haze of funeral arrangements and legal matters. Grace's father had left her the house and a small amount of savings. It was not much, but it was enough to give her security for a while. Kieran recovered quickly from his ordeal. Within 2 days, the blisters on his hands had begun to heal, and the color had returned to his face. He stayed at the boarding house in town but visited Grace every day, helping with whatever needed doing. He fixed the loose shutter on the kitchen window. He chopped enough wood to last through the winter. He sat with her while she went through her father's belongings, offering quiet support when the grief became too heavy. Grace found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. When he was near, the world seemed more vivid, more alive. When he left each evening, the house felt emptier than it had before she met him. On the 4th day after her father's funeral, Kieran arrived with an announcement. "The train has been repaired. They have cleared the track and got a new engineer. It leaves tomorrow, heading back to Cheyenne." Grace felt her heart sink. "You are leaving?" "I have to report back to the railroad. I am still a conductor and there are routes that need running." He paused. "But I wanted to ask you something before I go." "What?" Kieran took a deep breath. "Come with me." Grace stared at him. "What?" "Come with me. To Cheyenne or wherever you want to go." "Grace, I know we have only known each other a short time. I know you are grieving and this is terrible timing, but I cannot leave here without telling you how I feel." He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "When I was out there in the blizzard, walking through the snow and cold, there was only one thing that kept me going. It was the thought of you. The thought of seeing you again, of making sure you got to your father, of finding out if what I felt when I looked at you was real or just the heightened emotions of a crisis. And now," Grace whispered, "now I know it is real. Grace Carter, I am falling in love with you. Actually, I think I have already fallen. I love the way you took charge when the men were arguing. I love the way you cared for Thomas even though you did not know him. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you look at the world. I love you." Grace's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Kieran, you do not have to say anything right now," he said quickly. "I know you need time. I just needed you to know how I feel, and I need you to know that there is a place for you in my life if you want it. I will leave my job with the railroad. I will settle here in Green River if that is what you want, or we can go somewhere new, start fresh together. Anything, as long as I am with you." Grace felt tears prickling her eyes again, but these were different from the tears she had shed over the past days. These were tears of joy and hope and overwhelming emotion. "My father made me promise him something before he died," she said softly. "He made me promise I would find love, that I would not spend my life alone. And will you keep that promise?" Grace looked up at Kieran, at this man who had walked through a blizzard for her, who had kept his word even when it nearly killed him, who was offering her his heart with such raw honesty. "Yes," she said. "I will keep that promise. I love you too, Kieran. I think I started falling in love with you when you held my hand in the engine car, maybe even before that. And I want to be with you, wherever that takes us." The smile that broke across Kieran's face was like the sun coming out after a storm. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Grace felt like everything in her life had been leading to this moment. All the loss and pain and struggle, all of it had brought her here, to this man, to this love. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "So you will come with me." "I will go anywhere with you," Grace said, "but I have one condition, anything. We get married first. I will not travel with you unwed." "Call me old-fashioned, but I want to do this properly." Kieran laughed, a sound of pure joy. "I would not have it any other way." "When?" "As soon as it can be arranged. There is a minister in town who performed my father's funeral service. I am sure he would be willing to marry us." And so, 1 week later, on a bright December morning, Grace Carter married Kieran Grayson in the small church in Green River. The ceremony was simple, with only a handful of witnesses. Martha Davies stood up for Grace, and Sheriff Porter stood up for Kieran. The other passengers from the train attended as well. Samuel, Dutch, William, and young Robert all came to see the conductor marry the woman he had risked his life to save. Grace wore a simple blue dress that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit her. Kieran wore his best suit, borrowed from the boarding house owner. Neither of them cared about the simplicity of it all. They only had eyes for each other. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kieran kissed Grace with such tenderness that several people in the small congregation wiped at their eyes. Grace felt a happiness so complete, so overwhelming, that she almost could not believe it was real. After the ceremony, there was a small celebration at Martha's house. The neighbors had brought food and someone produced a fiddle. There was music and laughter, and for a few hours, Grace forgot about grief and loss. She danced with her new husband, feeling his strong arms around her, and let herself simply be happy. That night, in the small house that had been her father's, Kieran carried Grace over the threshold. They had decided to stay in Green River for a while, at least through the winter. Kieran had sent word to the railroad that he was resigning his position as conductor. He had already been offered work at the lumber mill where Grace's father had worked, a job that would keep them comfortable while they figured out their future. "Are you sure about this?" Grace asked as Kieran set her down gently in the bedroom. "You loved working on the trains." "I love you more," Kieran said simply. "The trains will always be there. But a life with you, a chance to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night, that is something I will not risk losing." He cupped her face in his hands, looking at her with such love that Grace felt her breath catch. "You are my home now, Grace. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." Grace pulled him down for a kiss, pouring all her love and gratitude and joy into it. They made love for the first time that night, learning each other's bodies with gentle hands and whispered words. It was tender and sweet, and everything Grace had never known she wanted. Afterwards, lying in Kieran's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Grace thought about the strange journey that had brought them here. A blizzard that should have been a disaster had instead become the greatest blessing of her life. "What are you thinking about?" Kieran asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I am thinking that I should write a letter to the railroad, thanking them for stranding us in a blizzard," Kieran laughed. "I do not think they would appreciate that. Probably not. But it is true. If that train had not broken down, if we had not been trapped together, I never would have met you. I would have gone on with my life, taking care of my father until he died, and then living alone in this house with nothing but memories. You would have found happiness eventually," Kieran said. "Someone like you could not help but attract good things. Maybe, but I do not want any other happiness. I want this, I want you." "You have me," Kieran promised. "For the rest of my life you have me." The winter passed peacefully. Kieran worked at the lumber mill and proved himself to be a hard worker. Grace kept the house and got to know the neighbors better. She and Martha became close friends, and Grace found herself becoming part of the community in a way she never had when she was so focused on caring for her father. In the spring, Grace discovered she was pregnant. The news filled both of them with joy and a little bit of terror. They were still newlyweds, still learning how to be married, and now they were going to be parents. "Are you scared?" Grace asked Kieran one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Terrified," he admitted. "I do not know how to be a father. I never had one, not really. What if I am terrible at it?" "You will not be terrible at it," Grace said with conviction. "You are the kindest, most caring man I know. You walked 15 miles through a blizzard to save people you barely knew. You will be an amazing father." "You really believe that?" "I really do." Their son was born in November of 1886, almost exactly a year after they had met. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Grace was sure she would not survive it. But Kieran stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, encouraging her, refusing to leave even when Martha tried to shoo him out. When the baby finally arrived, healthy and squalling, Kieran wept openly. He held his son with trembling hands, looking down at the tiny face with an expression of absolute wonder. "He is perfect," Kieran whispered. "Grace, he is perfect." "He is," Grace agreed, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names before but had not settled on anything. Now, looking at their son, Kieran said, "What about Thomas? After the engineer, he was a good man and he should be remembered." Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Thomas Grayson. I love it." Baby Thomas was a healthy, happy child who rarely cried and seemed to find everything fascinating. As he grew, he proved to have his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Kieran was completely besotted with him, spending every free moment playing with his son or reading to him. Watching them together, Grace often thought about how different her life was now from what she had imagined. She had expected to grow old alone, defined by duty and sacrifice. Instead, she had found love and partnership and a joy so complete it sometimes scared her. 2 years after Thomas was born, Grace gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. The pregnancy was difficult and the birth even more so. For a while, the doctor was worried they might lose Grace or the babies or all three. But Grace was stronger than she looked, and she fought through the pain and exhaustion to bring her children into the world. They named the boy James, after Kieran's father, and the girl Catherine, after Grace's mother. The twins were tiny and fragile at first, but they grew stronger each day. Thomas was fascinated by his new siblings, always wanting to help care for them. The house that had once felt so empty was now filled with the noise and chaos of children. Grace had never been happier. As the years passed, Kieran and Grace built a life together that was simple but rich. Kieran eventually left the lumber mill and started his own small freight business, hauling goods between Green River and the surrounding towns. It was good, honest work that allowed him to be home most nights. Grace became known in town for her kindness and her skill as a midwife. Having been through difficult births herself, she felt called to help other women through the same experience. She studied with the town doctor and learned everything she could, and soon she was the person people called when a baby was coming. Their children grew up surrounded by love. Thomas was quiet and studious, always with his nose in a book. James was adventurous and bold, the first to climb the highest tree or wade into the deepest part of the creek. Catherine was gentle and artistic, spending hours drawing pictures of the world around her. On winter evenings, the family would gather around the fire. Kieran would tell stories of his adventures in the cavalry and on the railroad. Grace would talk about growing up with her father. The children would listen with wide eyes, asking questions and begging for more stories. One such evening, when Thomas was 10 and the twins were 8, young Thomas asked, "Papa, tell us again how you and Mama met." Kieran smiled and pulled Grace close to his side. "Well, it was during the worst blizzard Wyoming Territory had seen in 20 years. As Kieran told the story, embellishing it a bit for the children's entertainment, Grace looked around at her family. Her husband, still handsome despite the gray starting to show in his beard. Her children, healthy and happy and loved. The warm home they had built together. She thought about that desperate girl on the train, racing to her father's deathbed, sure that her life was over before it had truly begun. If she could go back and tell that girl what waited for her, what joy and love were just around the corner, she would not believe it. But it was true. All of it was true. Because of a blizzard and a broken-down train and a cowboy conductor who had made a choice that stunned everyone. He had chosen to risk his life for strangers, to walk into almost certain death because it was the right thing to do. And in doing so, he had given Grace the greatest gift imaginable. A life. A real life, full of love and purpose and meaning. Years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of their growing family. Thomas went to college in Laramie, studying to become a teacher. James followed his father into the freight business, showing a natural aptitude for logistics and negotiation. Catherine married a young doctor who had come to Green River fresh from medical school and opened a practice with Grace's blessing and support. Grace and Kieran became grandparents when Catherine had her first child, a daughter. Then Thomas married and had children of his own. James eventually settled down with a spirited young woman he met while making a delivery to Rock Springs. Through it all, Grace and Kieran's love only deepened. They had started their relationship in crisis, bonded by extreme circumstances, but they built their life on much more solid ground. They learned each other's habits and quirks. They fought sometimes, usually about silly things, and then made up and remembered why they loved each other. They supported each other through difficulties. When Grace's skills as a midwife could not save a young mother and her baby, Kieran held her while she cried and reminded her of all the lives she had saved. When Kieran's freight business nearly went under during a particularly harsh winter, Grace worked beside him, doing the books and finding new customers. They celebrated joys together. The birth of each grandchild, the success of their children. The simple pleasure of a quiet morning drinking coffee together on the porch. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Kieran took Grace back to the place where the train had broken down all those years ago. The railroad had long since abandoned that section of track, routing the trains through a different pass. But the old railbed was still visible, and Kieran had marked the spot where the train had stopped. They stood there together, holding hands, looking at the empty landscape. It was summer now, warm and green, nothing like that terrible winter day. "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked quietly. "Giving up your life on the railroad for me?" Kieran turned to her, his weathered face serious. "Grace Grayson, I have never regretted a single day I have spent as your husband. Not one. The railroad was just a job. You are my life. Even when I am being stubborn and refusing to listen to reason, especially then, it reminds me of your father and how lucky I am to love someone with that much strength." Kieran pulled her close. "I love you more today than I did 20 years ago. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." Grace kissed him, pouring 20 years of love and gratitude into it. When they finally pulled apart, she said, "The blizzard was the best thing that ever happened to me." "Me too." They stood there for a long time, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built a life that was more beautiful than either could have imagined. Eventually, they walked back to the wagon Kieran had borrowed for the trip and headed home, to Green River, to their family, to the life they had built together one day at a time with love and determination and faith in each other. Grace lived to see her children grown, her grandchildren educated and settled, and even the birth of her first great-grandchild. Kieran stayed healthy and strong well into his 70s, still working a bit with the freight business though James had mostly taken it over. One evening in late autumn, when they were both in their 70s, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day. Grace's hands were not as steady as they used to be, and Kieran moved more slowly, but they were still together, still in love. "I was thinking today," Grace said, her hand in Kieran's, "about how different my life could have been if that train had not broken down. If you had not walked through the blizzard, if we had not taken a chance on love." "You think we would have found each other anyway?" Kieran asked. "If circumstances had been different, I like to think so. I like to think that somehow, someway, we were meant to be together." Grace squeezed his hand. "But I am glad it happened the way it did. Every moment of fear and worry and uncertainty was worth it to get here." "To get where?" "Here, to this life, to you, to the family we built and the love we shared, all of it. Every single moment." Kieran raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Grace Grayson, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy conductor who was probably more scared than he wanted to admit. Thank you for walking through a blizzard for me." They sat there together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Around them, the sounds of their grandchildren playing in the yard mixed with the evening songs of birds settling in for the night. Inside the house, Catherine was cooking dinner, and the smell of fresh bread wafted through the open windows. It was a perfect moment, a perfect life, built from the ashes of loss and fear, forged in the crucible of a winter storm and strengthened by 20 years of love and partnership. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Grace thought about the promise she had made to her dying father all those years ago. The promise to find love, to be happy, to live her own life. She had kept that promise and so much more. She had found not just love, but a love that would last a lifetime. She had found not just happiness, but joy that filled every corner of her days. She had found not just a life, but a life rich with purpose and meaning and connection. The blizzard had seemed like an ending, a disaster that threatened everything. But it had actually been a beginning, the beginning of the greatest adventure of her life. As Grace and Kieran grew older, they remained fixtures in the Green River community. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them with love and care. Thomas brought his family to visit every Sunday for dinner. James stopped by several times a week with his wife and children. Catherine, living just down the street, saw them nearly every day. The great-grandchildren would climb into Kieran's lap, begging for stories about the old days. He would tell them about riding with the cavalry, about working on the railroad, and always about the blizzard that brought him their great-grandmother. Grace would watch these moments with a full heart. Sometimes she would catch Kieran's eye across the room, and he would wink at her, and she would feel like that young woman again, heart racing as a handsome conductor took her hand in a stranded train. When Grace was 76, she fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor who treated her was the same one who had delivered several of her grandchildren, and he was honest with her about her chances. Her lungs were weak, her body tired, but Grace was not ready to give up. She had too much to live for. Kieran never left her side during those difficult weeks. He sat by her bed, reading to her, talking to her, holding her hand. The children came in shifts, keeping vigil, praying for her recovery, and slowly, miraculously, Grace got better. Her strength returned. The fever broke. Within a month, she was back on her feet, though moving more slowly than before. "You scared me," Kieran told her one evening after she had recovered. "I thought I was going to lose you." "I am not going anywhere yet," Grace said firmly. "We still have grandchildren to spoil and great-grandchildren to meet. I am not done living." "Good, because I am not ready to live without you." Grace lived another 8 years, seeing the birth of more great-grandchildren and celebrating her golden wedding anniversary with Kieran. The whole town turned out for that celebration, honoring the couple who had become something of a legend in Green River. Young couples would come to them for advice about marriage and love. Grace and Kieran always said the same things. Be honest with each other. Support each other through difficulties. Never go to bed angry. Remember why you fell in love in the first place. But mostly, they said, choose each other. Every day, in big ways and small ways, choose to love and be loved. When Grace finally passed away at the age of 84, it was peacefully in her sleep, with Kieran lying beside her. She simply did not wake up one morning. The doctor said her heart had given out, that it had been worn down by age and time. But those who knew her said differently. They said Grace's heart had not given out. It had simply given everything it had to give. It had loved fully and completely for 8 decades, and it had no more to give. It had done its job perfectly. Kieran was devastated by her death. For the first time in their marriage, they would not face something together. He struggled through the funeral, supported by his children and grandchildren. The church was packed with people who had been touched by Grace's kindness over the years. After Grace was buried, Kieran moved in with Catherine and her family. He could not bear to be in the house he had shared with Grace, surrounded by memories of their life together. Catherine cared for her father with the same gentle kindness her mother had shown to others all her life. Kieran lived only 6 more months after Grace's death. The doctor said it was heart failure, but the family knew better. Kieran had died of a broken heart. Without Grace, without his other half, he simply could not go on. On the day Kieran died, Catherine sat with him, holding his hand as he had once held her mother's. His breathing was labored, his eyes closed. But just before the end, he opened his eyes and smiled. "Grace," he whispered, "I am coming, my love." And then he was gone. They buried Kieran next to Grace in the Green River Cemetery, under a large oak tree. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and a single inscription chosen by their children. Together in a blizzard, together in love, together forever. Over the years, the story of Grace and Kieran became something of a legend in Green River. People told their children and grandchildren about the conductor who walked through a blizzard to save a woman and ended up finding true love. About the couple who built a beautiful life from the most difficult circumstances. The house where they had lived was eventually sold, but the new owners reported sometimes feeling a sense of warmth and love there, as if the happiness Grace and Kieran had shared still lingered in the walls. Their descendants continued to thrive in Green River and beyond. Thomas's line produced teachers and scholars. James's children became successful business people. Catherine's descendants went into medicine and healing, carrying on Grace's legacy of caring for others. And on snowy winter nights, when blizzards swept through Wyoming, people would look out their windows at the swirling white and remember the story. They would think about how something that seemed like a disaster, like an ending, could actually be a beginning. They would think about the cowboy conductor who made a choice that stunned everyone. Not the choice to walk through the blizzard, though that was stunning enough, but the choice to open his heart, to risk love, to believe that sometimes the most unlikely circumstances can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. They would think about Grace, who had spent years caring for her dying father and thought her life was over before it began, only to discover that love could find you anywhere, even stranded in a blizzard with no hope in sight. And they would think about how Grace and Kieran had taken that chance meeting, that crisis-thrown-together situation, and built something lasting. Something that outlived them both and touched everyone who heard their story, because that is what true love does. It transcends circumstances. It outlasts the bodies that house it. It ripples out from one couple to touch entire communities, entire generations. The blizzard of December 1885 was recorded in history books as one of the worst storms to hit Wyoming Territory. The train breakdown was noted in railroad records as a costly incident that led to new safety protocols. But the real legacy of that blizzard was not found in history books or railroad archives. It was found in the descendants of Grace Carter and Kieran Grayson, who carried forward the love their ancestors had discovered in the most unlikely of places. It was found in the countless couples in Green River and beyond who heard the story and believed that love was worth taking a chance on, worth risking everything for, worth fighting to preserve. It was found in the simple truth that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best. That disaster can become opportunity. That being stranded can actually mean being exactly where you are supposed to be. And it was found in the knowledge that when you find real love, the kind that makes you willing to walk through a blizzard or give up everything you knew or take a chance on someone you barely know, you hold on to it. You nurture it. You build a life with it. Because that kind of love, the love that Grace and Kieran found on a broken-down train in the middle of a Wyoming blizzard, is the rarest and most precious thing in the world. And once you find it, you never let it go, not through hardship or loss or the passing of years. Not through the changing seasons or the inevitable trials of life. Not even through death itself. That kind of love lasts forever. And somewhere, beyond the veil that separates this world from the next, Grace and Kieran were together still. Dancing in the light, holding hands, loving each other with the same intensity they had felt on that first terrifying, wonderful night when a train broke down, a blizzard raged, and two souls found each other against all odds. The cowboy conductor had made his choice. To risk everything for strangers, to walk through hell to keep a promise, to open his heart to a woman he barely knew, and in making that choice, he had not just saved lives. He had created one. A life full of love and laughter and family and joy. A life that had touched countless others and would continue to do so for generations to come. That was the real miracle of the blizzard. Not survival, though that was miraculous enough, but transformation. The transformation of two lonely people into a couple, of crisis into opportunity, of fear into love, and in the end, that was the lesson their story taught. That love can bloom anywhere, even in the harshest winter. That taking a chance, risking your heart, opening yourself up to another person is always worth it. That the choices we make in moments of crisis define not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone who comes after us. Grace and Kieran's descendants would pass down the story for generations, embellishing it slightly with each telling, but keeping the heart of it the same. The blizzard. The broken train. The desperate walk. The promise kept. The love found. And each time the story was told, it would remind people that true love exists, that it is worth searching for, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. That sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances. That courage and compassion and the willingness to risk everything can change not just one life, but many. The train that broke down in the blizzard had long since been scrapped for parts. The tracks had been rerouted. The people who had been there that day had all passed on. But the love story that began in that frozen moment in time lived on, as real and vital and inspiring as it had been on that December day in 1885, when a cowboy conductor looked into the eyes of a frightened woman and decided to risk everything to help her. That was the choice that stunned everyone, not because it was unusual for someone to be heroic in a crisis, but because it led to something so beautiful, so lasting, so perfect that it seemed almost impossible. But it was not impossible. It was real. As real as the snow that had fallen that day, as real as the cold that had threatened to kill them all, as real as the love that had warmed them and sustained them and given their lives meaning. Grace and Kieran had found each other in a blizzard. They had built a life in the sunshine. And they had loved each other through it all, from that first terrifying night to the peaceful endings of their long lives. That was their legacy. Not the things they owned or the money they made or the positions they held, but the love they shared and the family they created, and the example they set for everyone who came after them. And on snowy nights in Green River, when the wind howled and the temperature dropped and the world turned white, people would gather their loved ones close and remember. Remember that love conquers all, that courage matters, that promises kept can change everything. They would remember Grace and Kieran, the conductor and the woman, who found forever in the midst of a storm.